are. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. My name is Sean. I'll be your host. If you have a cell phone, please silence it at this time. If you don't have a cell phone, good for you. On April 3rd, we will begin our 8-week series on the Vietnam War at People's University. These will be Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Brochures on the table. And there's no signing up, no, just show up. Next Tuesday on the 18th, we will celebrate belatedly St. Patrick's Day and Irish Heritage Month with Laura Tracy Bentley. She is a poet from Huntington, and Pittsburgh-based Celtic violinist Charles May, and they will bring you words and music for St. Patrick's Day. Today, we welcome back a good friend, former history teacher, and the president of the Wheeling Area Historical Society for a quarter century. Margaret Brennan is awesome, as Pam just said, and she has a wealth of information on Wheeling's past. She earned her BA from Wheeling College and MA in history from WVU. She's a published author in various scholarly publications. She can be found researching, working to promote and preserve Wheeling's heritage pretty much 24/7. She is a West Virginia history hero, and she is a good friend of this library. She's here today, as you know, to tell us about the life and times of Agnes Westbrook Morrison. Please welcome Margaret Brennan.
From the tall to the short. How wonderful it is to see each and every one of you here today. I especially want to welcome Andrew Barnes, who's sitting over to the left here. He came from the WVU Foundation in Morgantown, and he administers the Agnes Morrison Scholarship, and so he's with us today, and at the end of the day he'll say a few words. And to acknowledge the important research for this talk from Dr. Charles Julian, who's sitting back here. Yes, he deserves that. I couldn't have done it without him. He called this morning and he said, I just found out 1906 is when they put in the 3-year curriculum for law students. Who knew? So, okay, now we all know. I sure didn't know that. I want to also recognize, and will later, all the members of the women's clubs that are here today that exist in the shadow of Agnes Morrison. Now, just who was Agnes Jane Westbrook Morrison? And why are we even gathered in this room today to talk about her? Well, ladies and gentlemen, she was really something. She was a somebody in her time. Peggy Noonan, the columnist, recently told us, try to remember the great ones who led difficult lives, but who made such a difference. We must give praise to these human beings. And so we will today, in this Women's History Month, give praise to a foremother, a trailblazer, born in Wheeling and living most of her adult life right here in this city. A bright, strong, visionary woman of West Virginia. Now, this historical lady was born, would you believe, March 17th, 1854. Of course, I have green on today to honor her heritage because, and that would have been 171 years ago, coming up March 17th. Her parents, Henry and Martha Westbrook, were born in Ireland. It's a wonder they didn't name her Patty, except they weren't Gaelic Irish. They were Episcopalians, which is wonderful, but that tells you a lot. So, Henry arrived in this country in 1849, and apparently he met his wife. He married her at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in 1853. Now, Agnes was their first child, and she was followed by 4 others. Henry is listed in the 1856 city directory here as a tailor, and for all of his life, he was a tailor. He lived on an alley in East Wheeling, and that tells you something too, just starting out. But he did not stay here long, and there's so much we don't know. There's so many gaps. We don't know why he left Wheeling, but he spent most of his life in Washington, Pennsylvania, and that's where that's later. But interestingly, he died here in Wheeling in 1908. He and his wife came to visit Agnes, and he got sick and died like that. And so he was 81. Martha died in 1919. She was 93 in 1919. So Agnes had good genes. For a time, Agnes attended Miss Bonham's School for Young Girls. And this I'd love to know more about. I'm going to call Linda Cummins. In a room in St. Matthew's with 75 kids in the room. Now, maybe it was the old St. Matthew's and they took the whole basement. I can't imagine, and this woman must have been extraordinary. She was supposed to be so good, but oh boy. In the room were Sally Howe Ogilvy and Sally Maxwell Bennett, and a lot of other people. Then Agnes went to the West Alexander Academy, and we don't know much about that. But finally, and this is very interesting, she went to Poughkeepsie, New York, to go to the Cottage Hill Seminary. Questions all over the place, and Chuck found all of this out. How in the heck did she know about this seminary in Poughkeepsie, New York? Well, guess who started it? The niece of Mr. Vassar, of Vassar College for Women. And they said it was the niece who kept prodding him, start a college, we need a good school. And eventually the Cottage Hill Seminary and Vassar combined. But she knew about it. How much money? Where did she get the money? You just have all kinds of questions. Now, in 1880, Agnes was 26 and she was living at home, which would have been Main Street in Washington, PA. And I was up there Friday, and of course, everything's gone. They demolished a lot of the old. So the home isn't there anymore. In 1881, at 27, and that would have been old for the time, she married Charles Sumner Morrison. He was 28. He was from Martins Ferry. How did they meet? Well, apparently, Agnes was a friend of his sister, Addie. And Chuck found in the paper a teeny little, all you need is a little tidbit, saying Agnes went to Martins Ferry to visit the Morrison family with her friend Addie. And it's like, aha, so she knew him. And it also said one line, she had taught for a time at the Martins Ferry School. With that one line, we know at some point this woman was a teacher. We didn't know that before last week, that she taught. Okay, in 1880, Charles was listed in the Wheeling Directory as a law student reading law, and in the old days you read law with somebody, with Cochrane and Cochrane. And in 1881, he was listed as an attorney. In 1884, he was working for his father's company, I'm assuming as an attorney. Maybe that's why he studied law, to be an attorney with his dad. Then there was, of course, early on, the tragedy of losing their first and only child, little Paul Westbrook Morrison. And we find he was named after Charles's brother Paul. He was born in 1882. He lived about 2 months. And in going through this, I wonder how much this influenced this woman, because she always was looking out for children, as well as wanting women to be educated, but she always had that place for children. He was buried first in Mount Wood Cemetery, and then later on, after 1900, he was moved to the Washington Cemetery. So, what went on in their lives from 1882 to 1894? We really don't know. But they decided together, and you wonder about these conversations, to enter the West Virginia University Law School in 1894. A big deal for her, because no woman had ever done this before, and I'm sure she knew that. She was real smart. The law school dated from 1878, and the first woman to graduate from WVU in general was Harriet Lyons in 1891. That's not that far back. So, Agnes was really right there. And WVU was very progressive, and I did not realize this, with letting people like women into the school. True. Because again, Charles got there was an article about women in the law school, and you would be surprised. 1968, 1970, these Notre Dame, I think 1970 they let women in. It's like, are you kidding me? So, a lot of progressive law schools were not letting women in very early. Okay, so here comes this 39-year-old lady into a totally man's world. She was actually 40. And I suspect her husband was a great support, because I don't think it was easy, given men's view of women at the time, in general, and especially with law. They thought it would, heat up her brain, break down her body. I mean, you would not believe. She couldn't handle all that. I mean, her brain couldn't handle it. It's ridiculous. Okay. So, they were both, at the time, too, older students, which was unusual. But can you imagine, off they went, graduating in June of 1895. She was 41. He was 42. But can you imagine the first time she walked into that room? There were 26 students, 25 men. She probably knew they did not want her there, did not think she could do anything. Thank heaven she had her husband. The Intelligencer reported, and there's a thing up here from the paper, that she stood almost at the head of her class. That must have been interesting. There were only 3 semesters at the time: fall, summer, and spring. Tuition was $8 a semester. $8. The books, though, the books were really expensive. They were $20 to $30 for the books that they needed. And I suspect they stayed there. We don't know if they stayed there or not, but that's it. Agnes was, of course, the first woman admitted to the Ohio County Bar. You can't take that for granted. And the paper reported, she got a note in the paper, "There is no doubt she will be a shining ornament to her sex." Ornament. You hear that word in other places, ornament. She is a lady of broad culture and is sure to make her mark in her chosen profession. So this was in the Wheeling paper, and that's kind of neat. Now, she was only, and I was amazed at this, the 6th woman in the whole country to be a woman lawyer, to graduate from a law school. 6th in the whole country. 2 were from Yale, okay, 2 were a bunch of other places, and WVU. I thought, wow, we're up there. That's neat. Okay, she was admitted to practice at the West Virginia Supreme Court the next year, June of 1896. She was cited as a lady of education and high moral character. The Wheeling paper reported on her swearing in and said the clerk of the Supreme Court administered the oath to Mrs. Morrison, who, after kissing the Bible, took her seat. Mrs. Morrison is a lady of modest and retiring manner, and of commanding presence. Now, you're talking modest, retiring, and commanding, so that all doesn't seem to go together, but that's what they said. And they said she has none of the idiosyncrasies of the new woman. Now, I don't know what that means. Where this new woman in 1895, there were these new women lurking around, and they were watching out for them. Okay. Now, it's always good to hear the lady in her own words, and in the 1899 issue of the Woman's Easter Herald, and that's a whole story in itself, Agnes was also active early on with the King's Daughters, and I believe she helped to set up the first child place with the King's Daughters, but we still have to get into their records. We weren't able to. But she wrote an article in the magazine kind of on women and the law. And she addresses the idea that it was unwomanly to become a lawyer. The womanly woman, she said, will be womanly wherever she is and whatever she undertakes. Given a certain intellectual endowment, which of course she had, it is not more strange that a woman should study law than that a man should choose to do so. And I thought, well, good, take that, people. Yeah. And then she asks, what can a woman do as a lawyer? Anything that her brother lawyer can't do. Her clients are presumably those of her own sex. That's the way it was. Her work is in the office, making deeds, writing wills, giving counsel. But there was still progress to be made because many in society saw the law profession as unfit for the female. It took a long time. 2 women graduated law in WVU in 1899. And I would encourage you to look at this one picture up here. The famous Lila Frazier, who rode, I can't imagine this woman, she rode into Morgantown on a horse with 2 revolvers. They put her picture in the paper, okay? Her husband came by train, they said. Her husband came by train, which is interesting that he came with her, okay? But after 1899, no woman attended the College of Law for 20 years. 2 in 99, nothing for 20, until 1919. And between 1919 and 1969, 50 years, only 55 women graduated College of Law, of which we have some here, which is exciting. Okay, now back to Agnes. In 1896, in the city directory, she and her husband were both listed in bold print. But after that, very little. She rarely showed up. He apparently worked for his father at the Etna Standard Steel Company, and again, I'm sure, as a lawyer. And he and Agnes moved a few times. They finally settled on Chaplin Street, 1406 to be exact, which is it's north of St. Matthews, between St. Matthews and the Fort Henry Club on that side. That's where they lived for years. Think of it, she was right close to St. Matthews. They were close to the courthouse. It was a good place to live. And I wonder how hard it was for her to practice law, because I know the story of her friend, Dr. Harriet Jones, and her name popped up everywhere. And another early women doctor, Dr. Eliza Hughes. They basically took care of women's issues, and with Dr. Jones, the physicians tried to freeze her out. They wouldn't tell her anything about meetings or anything else. Didn't work. She was tough. She wouldn't be frozen. So that may have been, part of what Agnes had to encounter. Now, it was around these early days, at about 46 years old, that Agnes began her club work, when in 1900 she set up with, I'm sure, other great like-minded ladies, some of whom were probably from St. Matthews, where Agnes had belonged all the time she was in Wheeling, very active. She set up the Women's Literary Club. Women were searching for education. So this was the first organized women's club in the city. And it led to a flurry of other organizing efforts soon after. The library here has several of their early booklets. And I suspect the Constitution and bylaws were written by Agnes. In fact, I'm sure she brought her law degree to bear on all that she was involved in all of the women's clubs. Now, Mrs. Guy Allen, Annie Glass, was the first president of the literary club with Agnes as secretary. The group continued until 1931 when it disbanded. The meetings included topics, I'd like to have been there, such as the Italian paintings, Tolstoy, English art, Peter the Great, Moscow and the Kremlin. These ladies were not fooling around. These were not puffy topics here. And they also seemed like they were interested a lot in Russia, which is kind of relevant. But why this was doubly important was this club and Agnes in 1904 became the leading spirit to form the West Virginia Federation of Women's Clubs. Right here in Wheeling, they brought in women from all over the state. Annie Allen was selected as president and Agnes secretary. Later, Mrs. Allen became director of the National Federation of Women's Clubs. I mean, she was a big deal. The focus of the first year was sheltering homeless children. I just think that's amazing. And the work they have done through these many years and still do, women's suffrage, they were big, the war efforts, libraries, they fought for libraries all across West Virginia, the YWCA, on, is amazing. And from 1910 to 1912, Agnes was the president of the West Virginia Federation of Women's Clubs. One of her priorities was setting up a scholarship fund for girls to attend college. So, under her, a scholarship committee was formed, and the collegiate alumni was one of the first donors. They gave $50, and we're talking way back now. Her administration also focused on child welfare and young children working in poor industrial conditions, and you all know what that was like in the early days. These were important initiatives. In July of 1908, before Agnes became president of the Federation, she had instigated another important group in Wheeling, the Collegiate Alumni, with the goal of assisting young women to receive a college education. This group is still very active 117 years later, and we've got them here, and we'll talk about that later. Granting scholarships to students today from West Liberty University and West Virginia Northern Community College. Wouldn't she be pleased? Now, would the members of this group of collegiate alumni please stand and be honored? Collegiate people, stand up. That is really great. Okay, but that's not all, because the collegiate alumni, but because after the collegiate alumni, the formation of another group was brewing. That was, of course, the Women's Club of Wheeling. The planning meeting was convened on March 17th, 1911. Now, this was it was the planning meeting. Dr. Harriet Jones was chair. But there was a very preliminary meeting, probably to say, do we really want to do this? And in February, and the names that appeared were Annie Allen and Agnes Morrison. So she wasn't real active at the beginning, but she was one of the keys to, well, we really need to carry this forward. At the time, Agnes was heavily involved with the state federation. The club was formally set up, the Women's Club, April 8th, 1911, and here we are, 114 years later, still reaping the benefits of this truly great organization. So would the members of the Women's Club please stand and be recognized? Okay, I lost my place, but I'll find it. All right, now the first year that Agnes's name appeared in the club booklets was 1921, and she was living at 1406 Chaplin. And her name appeared until 1936. And that would make sense because Charles, her husband, was ill in 1937, so ill that they left Wheeling for Taylorstown, Pennsylvania, to live with Agnes's sister, Elizabeth, who had married a doctor, which was nice, Dr. Russell Wolfe. Charles died of Bright's disease in 1938, age 85. He was a really interesting guy. He was a singer, he was a historian, he had a big write-up with his picture in the paper, and so I think he was probably her stalwart support all those years. And then Agnes died a year later. In 1939, September 24th, she was also 85. And her death articles are up here. They were both buried in the Westbrook plot in Washington Cemetery. And so Charles Julian and I traveled up there. We thought we better find where this woman is. They are so nice up there, they really are. We found her grave in July of 2024, but to our extreme dismay, There was no stone on the grave for Agnes, for her husband Charles, or for little Paul. Well, of course, we couldn't have that. The family had completely died out. So several Wheeling women remedied that situation by having a granite marker placed on the grave and having the other stones cleaned and reset. And this, of course, is the picture of the gravestone today that she now has her marker. And they even we got them to put the lawyer's symbol there. We didn't put one for Charles. We thought this was about Agnes, so. So today we honor again this grand, might I say, Irish lady who contributed so much for the women of this city and indeed this state, and whose spirit lives on in those today who carry on her vision. She truly was the mother of clubs in Wheeling. Thank you. Now, we're not quite finished, because I would like to invite to the podium two of our outstanding women lawyers, Patricia Valentino Cush, and she is the reigning elder of the women lawyers and of Ohio County, and Sue Seibert Farnsworth, who was honored with the highest award from the College of Law, along with, of happy memory, Judy Herndon. And I went down to the College of Law and spent some hours there, and there are plaques everywhere, and Wheeling is well represented. And Sue's mother was also an early woman lawyer. So I would like to have Patricia and come up and say a few words, and then Sue.
I need help everywhere I go. Yeah, I was amused, more bemused by the fact that the inscriber of the monument chose not to put the scales of justice over the male head, again emphasizing the distinction that being a woman lawyer always is attached to you. I have no idea why. I can tell you that those periods of years between the time she graduated and the time I graduated, we were very close to that close end period, and indeed I was the only woman in my class, which had its ups and downs. Unlike Agnes, I was not as bold. The first day I went into the law school, they had 2 lecture rooms, one at each end of the College of Law in those days, and I opened the door of the first lecture room, and in front of me were something like 60 men with their shirts and ties on, and I closed the door and went home. But the next day I gathered my courage and went in and stayed there. Later on, I was very honored to have been elected to serve as the Ohio County prosecuting attorney. That was the year that the legislature determined that Ohio County needed a full-time prosecuting attorney. All the prosecuting attorneys across the state were part-time prosecutors. They had a law practice, and then they used to, on the side, do the criminal law. And in fact, Sue and I have talked about this. Young lawyers need experience and a little bit of money too, and so almost everybody I knew and Sue knew would go into court on what is called docket day, when people who could not afford an attorney were appointed an attorney from among the lawyers in the Bar Association. But that was in criminal cases only, because everybody is entitled to a lawyer when you're charged with a crime. And the judges just felt that the practice of criminal law was just too hard for women. You had to adapt a woman's femininity to the terrible things that you have to do when you're a criminal law lawyer. I'll tell you, they're pretty bad, but by the time I got there, that was changing a little bit. So it's been an interesting ride. I'm really grateful for Agnes. I had no idea. I don't know why. I'm really proud of those people who were able to manage to bring us to the knowledge of her and to put her grave marker on. At WVU, I haven't been down there for a long time, the new College of Law, which is not new anymore, they have photos all around the building of the law school classes. In my year, I was the only woman in the picture, as Agnes is here. And many young lawyers for years would come to me and say, I saw your picture on the law school wall. I always wanted to meet you. That's how distinguished we appeared to be to them. So hooray for us. We got there, and been a long ride. Thank you very much. I graduated in 1962. And fortunately, because women could vote by the time I was running for prosecutor, that's how I got elected.
Thank you. You have to be there. You have to be one in lawyerdom to be able to speak with authority. So now we have Sue.
Not sure I can do that, but now you know that we're here because we are the oldest living women lawyers in this area. We haven't always been. My mother was a lawyer. She graduated in 1938. There were 5 women in her class. There were not 5 women again in a class until my class in '67, and we had 5 women. I used to think there weren't 5 women in between, but I've since learned that there were. I forget how many you said had, but in any event, in those days they took all of us who applied, not just women, all the men and women who applied, and flunked us out. We were the last class to do that. We entered, there were 121 in our class and we graduated 59. Well, they couldn't keep doing that because then, fortunately, lots of people wanted to go to law school, and so then they let you in based on grades and test scores. But you can see how far ahead we were of the Ivy Leagues, who didn't begin to admit women in any great number at all until the 70s. So I'm really grateful to Margaret and Chuck, who did all of this. I asked her a question. Do you know Agnes Morrison? She really did not. And well, nor did. So do we all, and we're very grateful. Thank you.
We are so lucky to have all the great lawyers we do in this city. And now I'd like to introduce a foreigner to Wheeling. Mr. Andrew Barnes has driven in from Morgantown, and he is with the WVU Foundation, and he administers the Agnes Westbrook Morrison Scholarship, set up since, and he might say this, 1995 from the women lawyers at WVU. So I'll first ask him to come up, and then I'm going to ask the collegiate alumni, some people to come up. So Andrew would like to say a few words to us.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to everyone, and thank you for having me here. This is it's a real honor to be here, and really exciting to get to hear the story of one of our alumni. And I work exclusively through the foundation with the College of Law, so I get to roam the halls of the new College of Law building, and I often stop by all of the composite photos we have on the walls that line as Patty was saying. And I don't get to hear the stories behind them. And this is one of those unique opportunities where we really get to hear an in-depth story of one of our trailblazers. And very honored as well to know that WVU was number 6 to graduate a female lawyer. And I think that's something that we can be very proud of as an institution. And I think what's also really remarkable from today's talk is just what a legacy Agnes Westbrook Morrison has left, especially in the areas of setting up scholarships for young women to go to college, and what she was able to accomplish with that is just really remarkable. And I think there are so many other stories that are untold because of that we don't know about, but their lives were changed because of the work that she has done. And I think that through the scholarship that we have endowed at the WVU Foundation for the College of Law, there are so many other stories that we don't know of yet that are where lives are being changed through the support of that scholarship. So we're just really grateful that we even have that we have that scholarship, so that her story can continue to be told again and again with each award that we make every year. And so we're really grateful for that. And we really thank the support of our donors who help set that up and allow us to tell that story each year. And I think I also want to point out we do have information about the scholarship here that Margaret and Chuck so kindly put together. And also I brought some information from WVU Foundation about the College of Law. And yes, they're on the table. So thank you. Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, so if you want to help us keep telling that story, please consider making a gift to the scholarship. March 26th, if you mark your calendars, we are having WVU has a day of giving that is going on in the College of Law. You can also go online that day and make a gift as well, and I have information about that up here as well. So please consider doing that. So thank you so much. It was a real honor to be here today.
Now we have to talk turkey about money, because this scholarship is open to donations. And if any of you are so moved, on the tables, there's the information. But I would like to invite the president of the Collegiate Alumni, Carol Varner, to come up and make a special presentation to Andrew, and also her person with her.
I'd like to thank Ms. Brennan and also Dr. Julie.
Let me get your mic. We were in class together at Mormon High School.
I know. I would just like to thank Margaret and Charles for all their research so they could keep the legacy of our founder for the Collegiate Alumni Women alive. Just to put a shameless plug in, if anyone's interested, we have some membership forms. We only meet once a month for five months, that's it. And we always have a really nice guest lecturer. As a matter of fact, Margaret's going to be our guest lecturer March of 2025, celebrating International Women's Month. March of 2026, thank you. Anyway, at this time, on behalf of the Collegiate Alumni, we would like to present the Scholarship Foundation for WVU in behalf of our club with the Agnes Westbrook Morrison Scholarship Award for $1,000.
Yes. Well, that was surely a good way to end a program. I don't know if we do have a few minutes. If any of you have any questions that I'm not sure I could answer.
If you do, please wait for me to get to you with the microphone so that all of our online viewers can hear the question.
Okay. Jean.
I thought it was curious that the Morrisons lived at 1406 Chaplin. Would that be where there's the parking lot between? Yes. Okay.
I think
and
so,
in my
yeah.
research on Dr. Alfred Hughes and his sister Eliza Hughes, I think that is where he had his office before the Civil War, or during the Civil War.
Okay.
I think that's where their house was, and if they were friends, perhaps that's how the house eventually
Yeah.
went there.
Yeah,
So I'll have to
you
do some
know,
research.
I think all these women, they knew each other. They networked. Because, I mean, we just hit the tip. That Mrs. Allen and Mrs. Garden, I mean, they were known statewide for all that they did for good things in West Virginia. And we need to do more with them, too. And Eliza Hughes, of course, and Jean is preserving the Hughes house. She was the first woman doctor in the whole state of West Virginia, and then Harriet Jones was the first professionally accepted doctor in the state. So walking the streets of Wheeling were great, great women, you know, and they really did pave the way for the rest of us. Thank you. Okay, Denny? We're so grateful to have our busy mayor here with us.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you. Margaret, I just want to say to you and Chuck, on behalf of the city, thank you for the amazing work you do. If you hadn't done things like this is another story that might go untold. So Wheeling has a phenomenal history, and I think a phenomenal future. But thanks for digging these things up. Hopefully we continue to do this. What a marvelous history that we have. Thank you again. Thanks,
That's
Chuck.
true. Yeah. That's true. Anybody else? Yes, back there.
I know that they lost their only child, but does she have any living relatives around here now, or brothers or sisters or anyone like that?
We didn't go into her family. She had a sister, Margaret, actually, who died. She was a teacher. She had two little brothers. It was very sad. They died on the same day, and I'm pulling this out. One was one was like 4, and their little stone is up there. His family, there were at one point there were 13 Morrisons in the city directory. So there were a lot of Morrisons running around, but it was an Ohio family. But there's so much back and forth between Wheeling and Martins Ferry and Bridgeport. You know, there were people running around everywhere. So it's possible that his side of the family may have some descendants, but he, and Chuck got all of this, he was an interesting man. He really was. And he was a singer that led songs all over the city. I mean, wherever there was a group that they needed a song leader, Charles Morrison was there. In 1936, when they did the big history of the Wheeling 1736 to 19, anyway, he did the history for the brochure. Who knew? They said, oh, he found out all kinds of things. And one thing about her, too, she was a poet. And there's a poem up here she wrote to a soldier in World War I from Wheeling. And he wrote her a poem back. And it's too dear. But it's old-fashioned poetry. You know, it's kind of, But, you know, but still, she wrote poems all through her life. But no, I got to say this, I'm kind of upset with her sister because her sister died like almost 10 years later after Agnes. No stone. Now, the only thing I can think of, I mean, they all lived together. The doctor took care of Agnes and her husband, and he was a doctor, and the Wolf family was big in Washington. There are wolves all over the place in the cemetery. So I don't know why they didn't put a little gravestone on her grave. That really bothers me. But, you know, I can't judge, although I do sometimes. But maybe toward the end, she couldn't think about it or something. I don't know. So anyway, hopefully a few of us will go back up to Agnes's grave and say a prayer and put some flowers on and pay her respect, because before Chuck and I went, nobody had visited that grave since, 40-something. You know, that's just the way it is.
Wait. Oh, what cemetery did you say
It's in the Washington, PA cemetery, big cemetery. Rebecca Harding Davis's whole family is buried there. All kinds of interesting people were buried there. You know?
I will say just briefly that there was no find a grave record memorial for Agnes or her son or her husband, and we took care of that. And so there is a memorial there if you go to find a grave, and there's a fair amount of biographical information. You can see the links to families that wasn't there before either. And this all got started when Margaret called one day and said, Sue Seibert Farnsworth said, do you know anything about the first woman who graduated from the W Law School? And I said, no, but I bet you're going to ask me a lot of questions about it. And so hundreds and hundreds of hours and little paths that you go through, like doing work on the Women's Collegiate Association, all the other pieces that she was involved with. The other extraordinary thing is that even though she was prominent in what she did, her obituary was tiny compared to her husband's. I mean, it was only a paragraph, and it had very little details, and yet she had only died a year later than her husband. So kind of sad, but thanks to Margaret and other people, at least there is a presence both online and in the cemetery for her and her relatives now. So.
And that's great to know that Chuck, of course, he is a computer whiz, and that he did all of the find a grave. So now when somebody puts her name in, we put pictures of the stones and everything is up there. But it's just amazing because she's known at WVU in the law school somewhat. She's known in women's groups somewhat statewide, but the fact that there was no find a grave was surprising too.
And a picture of the poem is on the Find a Grave Memorial too, so you can read the poem as you go to Find a Grave.
Oh, is that right? Okay, good. There you go.
I have a question for Andrew. Yes. What's the semester's tuition rate at law school right now?
In state or out of state? I'm assuming you mean in state.
Oh, in state for here.
So currently, well, I don't have the per semester, but annually it is $26,604 for law school.
That's a good question. Times have changed dramatically. But there are scholarships, right? Yes. Yeah, there are scholarships.
Can we ask Andrew, what is the scholarship amount, or does it vary based on the recipient?
So the scholarship, it does vary. It's an endowment with the WVU Foundation. So it's a legacy fund that will last into perpetuity, is invested and provides around $1,000 to $1,500 a year based on market returns. And so it's awarded each fall and spring, usually to the same student.
Alrighty, we have time for one more question. Does anybody have one?
Okay, are we done?
We've got one. No, nobody online can hear you yet. Wait a second.
I'm not an attorney, but I think we should recognize all the attorneys because we have several females and at least a few male attorneys here.
Lawyers,
So are we
stand up.
asking-
Attorneys, stand up.
Okay, let's have all the attorneys stand up. And hidden on that, in that table is Pat Cassidy, and we recognize him, even though he's not a woman. It's all right. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll wrap this up. We're in good shape time-wise, and this has been real special. I've enjoyed it, and having you all here made it special. So thank you so much, and we'll meet again.